Welcome to our podcast, Jennifer.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're very excited, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get started. And your book focuses on addressing and providing ways to limit anxiety, fatigue, and stress. And I'm thinking to myself, can we all relate to this or what? And we always like to get the backstory from our authors on their books. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book. Obviously, you mentioned a health scare crisis, greater than the power and strength of emotional grit. Tell us about that.
So in 2016, I got the surprising diagnosis of a brain tumor. And I say surprising because I never even had a headache. I mean, nothing. I literally went in for my eye exam to get my contact prescription renewed. And my eye doctor acted on a hunch because I guess my peripheral vision wasn't quite what it usually is. So I went to a specialist who then took pictures of the backs of my eyes. And he also acted on a hunch and said, I think you should have an MRI. It looks as though something is pushing on your optic nerve. So I didn't think twice about it. I thought, well, I'm not having any motor skill problems, no speech impediments, no cognitive inabilities. I just didn't think there was a problem. So imagine my surprise when I got the results of the MRI and the brain tumor was there. So I learned through the diagnosis to the anticipation of the surgery, through the recovery period, and through radiation treatments as well, that there were things in everyday life that actually helped me, but I couldn't figure out why. For example, I know that not everybody's a pet person, but I love pets. So I Googled, awesome. So I Googled, why do pets make me feel good? I learned there's actual science behind it. I mean, the love of a pet, that actual unconditional love can actually lower your stress hormones and influence the feel-good chemicals of the brain, such as dopamine or serotonin. And that's why, have you ever heard of dogs being at like VA hospitals for people with PTSD?
Yes.
They're there for a reason, and it's the same thing can be said for courthouses around the U.S. who have dogs for what are called courthouse canine programs, and they help lower the stress hormones of vulnerable adults and little kids who are going to testify. Otherwise, they'd be too nervous to do it. So it's I learned why pets were helping. I also learned that something as simple as laughter. When people say that laughter is the best medicine, it can actually affect you physically by again lowering those stress hormones and influencing the feel-good chemicals. So I learned to do things like go to Pandora on my phone and play comedians that I like and stuff like that. And in addition to pets and laughter, there's also gratitude, acts of kindness, music, other things too that had that same kind of effect. And I thought, these things are helping me as the patient, but they could also help caregivers as well. Whether it's hospital staff or people on the home front trying to help with these kinds of things as well. And I thought, well, then why not in the business world too? And it turns out they can help people anywhere.
So in the business world, a lot of times we refer to that as emotional intelligence, but really you're hitting on all of the same things. It's being self-aware and able to tap into those things that are meaningful for you and can help produce some of those effects. I have to tell you, it's interesting because when one of my second brother and my youngest brother died of a traumatic brain injury, and two of my brothers passed from brain injuries, it was very devastating. The second one had a worse impact on my mom than the first one. And a neighbor gave her a small dog because at the same time, like literally my brother was in the hospital for 3 days in a coma. His dog became very ill and they had to put him down, and the dog was staying with my mom. So the neighbor gave her a dog, and she's had that dog for 10 years. And it's been a little challenging because we've had to move her into a different home, and the dog has created some complications. But I tell people, I can't take that dog from my mom. That is her life. I said, I don't think my mom would be here if it wasn't for that dog. So absolutely, I'm a big dog fan. I also have a rescue dog myself. So love that you tied in some of those things that anyone can tap into. So for you and I, it's maybe the dog. For other people, it could be attitude of gratitude, like you said, in the workplace, or any number of things. Even a period of time where I was going through a lot of stress at work, I used to keep a picture of the river in fall with all the fall colors on my desk of my cabin, just so that occasionally I would take a moment to look away and remind myself that what I was going through was just a point in time. Here is another point in time, right? That would bring back good memories and good feelings and things like that. So I love it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's nostalgia can play a role as well. So I know that whenever I host my grandma, who's 97, by the way, at holiday get-togethers, I'll purposely use her mom's dishes because it has relevance, and meaning for my grandma. And with nostalgia, again, there's neuroscience behind that because it's a tie to the past. It's a longing for a sense of connectedness. And that's also why, did you ever see that movie with Kevin Costner called The Field of Dreams?
Yes, yes.
So I wrote about that in my book as well, the actually going there in Iowa, but they get visitors to this day from around the world because of the nostalgia of baseball and the story that the movie represents. And yeah,
Yeah,
it can
crazy,
have that
right?
effect.
It's the same reason like we put on this like it's holiday time, I'm doing Miracle on 34th Street, It's a Wonderful Life. It's,
Yeah,
same reason we have those go-to movies every year at this time of year. So,
it's true.
well, let's go back to your book. So in your book, you talk about emotional labor. And I got to be honest, I had to look that up. I don't think it's a very common term for most people. And I work in the business space, so I'm very used to using terms like emotional intelligence or emotional quotient or EQ or something like that. So tell us a little bit about what exactly is emotional labor and give us a few examples specific to the workplace.
Sure. So emotional labor is the dichotomy between how you're feeling on the inside versus how you can actually express it. And it applies both in your personal life and professionally. But professionally, it's even more complicated because the way you express things oftentimes has to comply with the social norms of your job and the social norms of your company. So, for example, say somebody is in sales and they're trying to meet some kind of a year end quota, and they have this prospective client they're meeting with. The person's asking lots of questions, taking up a lot of your time, and you can kind of tell by how the conversation's going, you're not going to land a sale. But on the outside, you still have to be perky. You still have to be smiling. You have to be like, this is normal. This is great. And on the inside, you're thinking, yeah, not so great. But you can't express it. And I've also seen it in the world of travel because I travel a fair amount for work. And I've seen gate agents where the gate agent might say over the PA system to everybody who's sitting there, uh, uh, say Delta, for example. Delta apologizes. The flight is now going to be delayed due to weather, blah, blah, blah. Well, then I can always tell people who don't travel a whole lot because they'll be grumbling at the gate. And sometimes they'll take it out on the gate agent and they'll say things like, there isn't a cloud in the sky. What do you mean because of the weather? Okay, well, you can't see the weather between here and the destination. All you can see is the weather here. But the gate agent still has to be smiling and, kind of suck it up, so to speak. And on the inside, they're frustrated. So yeah, it's that dichotomy between how you're feeling versus how you can express it. And it can get pretty stressful for people.
It's interesting that you mentioned specifically a gate agent example
Mhm.
because when we talk about EQ in the workplace, a lot of times I'll ask people, who do you think has the highest EQ? And they always want to pick the CEO. And ironically, they typically have the lowest EQ, but the highest EQ are typically people who are customer facing
Mhm.
because in some ways they have to, right? Just given that example, this
Yep.
emotional labor you're talking about, she has to say what she needs to say for the company and then kind of hide her feelings when people are giving her a hard time for something that she has no control over.
Yeah.
Low people, be kind to the gate
Yeah.
agents for everyone listening
Yeah.
because
Right.
these people can make your life great or they can make your life hell. And I've seen it work both ways,
Yeah.
not for me, but for other people.
So
So,
boring. Well, and even in an office setting, say someone works in middle management where you're not the decision maker, but you're having to express whatever the decision is to the people
yeah,
on your team. And on the outside, you have to make it sound like, hey, this is the best thing ever, and on the inside, you're thinking, well, yeah, I don't like it either, but you have to keep it to yourself. So,
I'm
but
like,
again, it's that dichotomy of whatever the expectation is as part of the culture of where you work. And there are some cultures too where people work where they could be kind of a tough exterior. And again, I go back to sales where it's you tough it out. We're all in sales. We're all really tough. We're not gonna show any kind of vulnerability. But maybe on the inside, the person's very frustrated. So
yes,
it's a problem.
that sure is, right? And that's a great example of a manager who would be potentially experiencing the emotional labor. So let's talk about the post pandemic world. Here we are, 2024, and a lot of people are seeking work life balance while experiencing a new normal. And the new normal is now a lot of people are being asked to go back into the office, whereas we had a lot of hybrid. I'm seeing a movement more and more where people are being asked to go into the workplace. So I'm seeing, based on your definition, that there's, feelings of emotional labor are rising in the workplace. So, what are some of the challenges that you see people facing in the workplace that could trigger these feelings of emotional labor? And what are some thoughts about how they might manage them?
So, as far as people having to go back into the office after maybe working remotely 100% for a while, or having some kind of a hybrid scenario, it could be having to get your head around the idea of a congested commute again. Maybe you live in a metro area and now you're having a commute every day. That's kind of frustrating. It could also be a matter of maybe you don't care for the people you sit by at work. Whereas before, when you worked from home, you didn't have to worry about the office politics or what have you of sitting by people that maybe you did particularly care for socially. Maybe someone's gossipy, maybe someone's just rude, and now you have to be around them. I've also heard that there are issues though from people who just work remotely 100%. So that has some issues too. I know that there are some people who will say, I'm an extrovert, and I personally am as well. And so the idea of working from home 100% has its issues because you're not getting those social interactions. You might miss the idea of the spontaneous happy hours and doing lunch with people. And there's also the issue of if you have some kind of an issue. I mean, maybe you have some kind of a frustration with your boss or with a new policy, but because you can't see who your boss is going to lunch with or doing happy hour with, you don't know where your teammates' loyalties lie. So you don't know who you can confide in to say, hey, does this
Right.
make sense to you? Or are you experiencing that? Because maybe they're friends with the boss and they're going to go tell them at happy hour, but you can't see them if you work remotely, so you don't know. So that,
Exactly.
you know, uh, it could also be a matter of in your home having certain distractions. So maybe it's your kids are home from school for the summer, or maybe your spouse is also working from home. And people will jokingly say that, you know what, I love my spouse, but being around each other a whole lot isn't always a good thing. Or people will
Mhm.
go on about that too. And I would say even beyond that, whether someone works from home or works from an office now, or even hybrid for that matter as well,
Yeah.
there are challenges of that 24-hour clock where
Yeah.
it, maybe someone is on Teams at 9 o'clock at night because they're catching up on messages. But if somebody else sees that your green light is on, they're going to go, "Oh, that person's working right now. I'm going to ask them a question." Well, no, I'm not on
Right.
the clock right now. I'm just trying to get caught up on my emails.
Right.
So
So,
it's
what are some tips, couple tips, one or two that people could employ to help them?
I would say that one thing is seek context. So I know that people might go online and see pictures of people through social media or different sites and think, wow, well, so and so's life is perfect now. I feel bad for myself. Well, the thing about it is that through social media, people tend to post pictures of things that are just positive. They're not going to post pictures of them fighting with their spouse or having work frustrations or what have you necessarily. So it's seek context. Also, as far as um, like your mental health and your perspective of things, attempt and sometimes it's kind of a challenge, but attempt to do what I call flipping the script. So it could be something as such as say somebody retires and that person who retired had all kinds of institutional knowledge up here because they work at your firm for years and they had a bunch of stuff that they did, a lot of clients who trusted them. And now you're being asked to fill some pretty big shoes. That could be kind of daunting. But in your mind, if you can flip the script and think, you know what? Yes, it's not convenient per se that so and so retired, but now I have a great opportunity. Now I have an opportunity to prove myself. Now I have an opportunity to learn something new about a product or service. Even products that might seem initially like there's no use for them can later have some use. I think about 3M, for example. The adhesive that now we know is on Post-it notes all over the world was initially made and thought, well, this isn't going to go anywhere. Well, it did.
Yes, it
So
did.
trying to flip the script and trying to find the positive in things initially can take some effort, but after a while it becomes a mindset and then more of a kind of a habit.
So let's talk about that because, in your book you talk about the power of perspective and forming the mindset of emotional grit. So how do you define emotional grit and why would this be an important mindset in the workplace?
So the kind of the catch-all that I have for a mindset of emotional grit is people think that being brave is the absence of fear, when in reality it could be feeling afraid but being able to persevere anyway. So maybe you're uncertain about a new company you joined because you're not familiar with the culture there and what it's like. Maybe you're uncertain about a promotion you got. It's being able in your mind to kind of figure out the how. And so my challenge for people is if you do get a new job or if you do get a promotion, look at it as, you know what, I was hired for a reason. Obviously somebody else believes in me. I should try to believe in myself and what I can do here. Or it could be something as simple as maybe you're a few months into the job saying to yourself, okay, you know what? Yes, I have a huge learning curve ahead of me, but I'm light years ahead of where I was 4 months ago. So it's trying to look at those little things and figuring out the how, being able to move forward.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I remember being a kid, maybe seventh or eighth grade, and my mom, my aunt who was very vocal and like a big personality, my cousin and myself having a conversation, and she's like, "Look, when you get out into the work world, if you're ever feeling nervous or you're not feeling like you're qualified, just remember everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time." And I never
It's
forget
true.
that,
Yes, it's true.
right? We all start at the same place, and
Yes.
it's so funny. I just think about that every now and then, or like even when I'm working with clients, I mention that still to this day. So that was from, I think I was eighth grade or going into eighth grade. So don't know exactly.
That's
So let's
very
talk about the
wise.
holiday season. So this holiday season, I'm focusing on gratitude. I always try to have an attitude of gratitude to remind me of all the things that are going right in my life and all the blessings I have. And anybody who's been around me for 6 seconds knows when I'm complaining, I'll stop myself and say, wow, I have first world problems, and then focus on the positive. So I've got a LinkedIn article on this, and you've talked about the science behind gratitude and giving back to others. So, just in brief, so that we can all understand, tell us about the neuroscience behind focusing on gratitude.
So gratitude is actually different from happiness because happiness can plateau. Like happiness could be buying a brand new car and you're excited about it, but after a while it's just a car payment. Whereas gratitude is a job offer after a layoff, maybe a house fire where your whole family gets out okay. It comes from the gut. And so the actual science behind gratitude coupled with doing something nice for somebody. So it could be independent of one another or together. You can actually get what's called a helper's high. It's a serotonin rush, which is why you can feel good if you express gratitude to someone. They, of course, benefit from hearing it, but you can feel good for expressing it. So I always suggest to people don't just thank people around you who you think like the obvious person is to be thanked. Thank people who you think don't get thanked very often. Like if you're in a restaurant, most people speak up if something's wrong with the food or if it's bad service. What if it's good service or a great meal? Like ask the server, please thank the cook, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Or if someone's having a bad day at work, I always suggest to them, do something such as go to Starbucks and don't just pay for your own coffee, pay for the person behind you, but do it anonymously and just walk away. You can actually feel good for doing it. The same thing can be said for giving someone your seat on the bus. So by being able to not just express gratitude, but also do it for people who don't normally get thanked, can be very rewarding for both parties.
I love that, especially as we're getting into the throes of the holiday season when, time is of the essence and we're all feeling a little pinched around the edges for time and trying to get all the things done. So, yes, I really like that. Let's what is it? Pay it forward in
Yeah.
kindness and gratitude. So I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, which I alluded to earlier. I think it plays a really important factor in the success of most leaders. And I always say, have some, want more, because it is a skill like a muscle that you can develop. So, from your perspective, how does emotional intelligence play into the concept of emotional grit?
Well, I think emotional intelligence, it's my understanding, does play a huge role in perspective. And it's something where you don't just look at something at face value, but look at it holistically. So maybe someone's having a bad day and they're being kind of rude to you at work or kind of short fused. Yes, of course, you don't deserve that, but it's also sometimes nice to ask the person, are you having a bad day or can I help you with something? I mean, it's kind of a way to acknowledge maybe the underlying problem, not just a symptom of something. I also know that as far as how it plays in with perspective, it can make a difference in how you're feeling as far as emotional intelligence. So, like for example, people have said to me over the years, "Well, Jen," and this is hypothetical numbers. Uh, every year, 1,000 people die from your kind of brain tumor. Does that make you kind of nervous? And of course, I feel bad for those people who passed away and their families, but I seek context. So I might ask, well, is it 1,000 out of 1,000 or is it 1,000 out of 10,000? So by seeking context, it kind of makes me feel a little bit better because I'm more informed. And it does make a difference in how I'm feeling at that time as well. So looking at things holistically, trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, as far as flipping the script. Have you ever heard of the term called neuroplasticity?
Yes, I have.
Love it. So
Yes.
there's two different kinds that I wrote about in my book. One is where if someone has a stroke, for example, and one part of their brain can't do something, another part of the brain takes over that function. But the other part that kind of plays into our conversation here is one where when you could attempt to look at things in more of a positive way, it can actually affect the wiring of your brain and how you perceive things in general. It's pretty amazing. So initially it takes some effort. After a while, it becomes more of a habit and then more of a mindset. So you can actually affect if you Google neuroplasticity or perhaps read about it in my book, it can affect the actual wiring of your brain and how you perceive things.
I love that. In 2020, my husband was going through a difficult work experience and challenge. Actually, it started prior to that. And he's an engineer, and I find that engineers tend to be skeptical by
Yeah.
nature.
Yeah.
And I'm an extrovert like you, but I'm also tend towards being positive. I'm realistic too, but I tend to bring an element of positivity to everything I do. And he was just bringing me down every morning. Like, so I literally have a page a day calendar. I only have really the one paper calendar I keep in my kitchen. So I would peel off the page a day, and every day I would write him a little positive note and put that by his breakfast plate. And yes, he would kind of chuckle and, little uncomfortable at first. And now he's just gotten so used to, if I don't do it, he's like, oh, what happened to my note? It's
That's so
like,
great. That's so great.
so trying to focus on the positive and attitude of
Mhm.
gratitude, kind of like you said, flipping the script. Yeah, what was
Mhm.
going on at work stunk at the time. But again, point in time and that this
Hopefully
too
learn
shall
from it.
pass. Yes.
Yep.
And how can we still move forward in a positive way in all of the other areas and focus on all the other amazing things in our lives? So,
Oh, yeah.
anyways,
There's an example I gave in my book of trying to be positive and flipping the script where I was in an elevator in downtown Minneapolis with a stranger. And he's behind me and I'm facing the numbers as they light up. And he said, could I say something without seeming weird? And I went, sure. And he goes, you have really beautiful hair. And I said, well, thank you. And then again, I'm looking at the numbers. And he goes, it's supposed to rain today. And I said, well, the grass will be green. And he goes, yeah, but then I have to mow it. And then I said, well, it's good exercise. And he goes, I'm not going to win this conversation, am I? And I went, nope. And then we got out of the elevator. And I couldn't point this guy out in a crowd now, but the way that I felt from that conversation and the fact that both of us laughed from it was an amazing thing, but a good example of perspective.
exactly. Well, I love that you brought us back to perspective because you do talk about that in your book. And we have a lot of different backgrounds and experiences that people bring to the workplace, and we all have different perspectives. So, talk a little bit about perspective and how can we use this to be more effective leaders?
So I think with perspective, it's good to look at things not just through the lens of how you see them, but try to look through the lens, so to speak, of other people's perspectives. So it's like you might think that something is good for your people who are all client facing, but it's important to ask those people who are client facing, well, how does this actually play out in real time? Like we think it's a great idea from the home office, but since you're out in the field interacting, how does this actually work? It's also good to acknowledge, of course, again, middle management, people who aren't necessarily always decision makers, but it's, well, what's it like as far as relaying this information to people who are in the field? What's it like for you as managers? Again, I think that people sometimes people confuse with managers managing versus leading, and both play a huge role, whether you're at the top of a firm or perhaps in different layers of management and different kinds of things. So if you can look at things from different perspectives, you'll have more of a well-rounded thought process and be able to make more informed decisions.
I think that's great. Just, I like the idea of looking at things and being well rounded. I think sometimes we can get a little tunnel vision, and especially so as we go higher up the ladder, right? We tend to kind of get a little more focused in and maybe a little more closed off. So I think that's great advice. Which brings me to my final question for today. We are winding down on time, if you can believe it. And I always like to ask our authors, what would be one piece of advice that you could give our viewers and listeners today on how to develop their own emotional grit in the workplace?
So I would say, again, part of it's reframing things, so trying to look at things from a more positive perspective. Also, it's going to be the idea of flipping the script on certain things. So that plays a role in, okay, this is on the, as far as like optics goes, this appears to be negative, but what can I get out of it that's positive? Also try to, as I alluded to earlier, look backwards and see how far you've come on things, whether it's with a certain project and maybe you initially were troubleshooting, now it's coming to fruition, or it could be a new job with a huge learning curve. But being able to actually look at things and go, okay, yeah, there's a huge learning curve ahead of us, but we've also come a long way too. And then considering using the different things I mentioned earlier, as far as the neuroscience of doing nice things for other people and doing it anonymously, perhaps. Maybe listening to comedians or music on Pandora on your smartphone, whether it's during your commute through Bluetooth or when you're working from home, because again, that can actually affect you physically. And again, not all of us are pet people, but as we talked about earlier, that can make a difference as well. But trying to seek out things like that in everyday life that can affect you physically can make a big difference in your work experience too.
That's awesome. I really love the looking back, and I think it's partly the time of year that we're in, and it's a great time to reflect back as you're planning to move forward. So love
Mhm.
the looking back and also the reframing. I think for me, those will be two of the biggest things I'll take away today. So that is all we have time for today. And I want to thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here with us. And I want to give a big thank you and shout out to our viewers and our listeners for joining us today. Um, I'll see y'all next time.